Hi everyone, I'm Damien.
And I'm Jeremy.
Welcome to the Suburb Data Podcast, where we cover everything from property investing to expert busting. If you're new here, we share our personal and professional experiences from over 20 years in the game. So you skip the mistakes we made and go straight to property investment success. And today's episode, part 3 of our Positive Cashflow Property series, I'd call it, Jez.
Yeah. Short series, only 3 in the series. But if you've missed part 1 and 2, make sure you go and find those episodes.
The last 2 episodes. So we've got visual formats for all of the episodes. So if you're listening, you can just open up the phone or the computer and see the visual aids. But I want to dive straight into this one. So does having cash flow neutral property mean I'll never have an issue with servicing mortgages? Now, we've got our, resident mortgage broker. Hi, Alana. I'm dialing a friend. Where are you?
Hi, guys.
Hey,
how are you today?
There's Alana.
Very good. Alana from We Mortgage Solutions. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Lucky. So I hear a lot. I've heard a lot in the past with dealing with clients. They think they can just buy a property, it'll pay for itself, and I can just keep buying and buying and buying. But from my understanding and doing a lot of planning for clients, there's always a specific ceiling, wasn't there? Like you just can't buy all these positive cash flow properties and accumulate because the banks will go, sorry, you've missed your cap. I can't get that serviceability. Do you see that being an issue when you?
Yeah. Great question. That's exactly right. So you could probably get up to, say, 6 properties that way, but I don't want to comment on the quality of properties. So I've done a bit of testing myself on serviceability. And as a basic example, if you have someone on, say, $85,000 per year, they're gearing up, they just want to focus on an investment portfolio. So they're living at home with parents rent-free. They have a very small credit card, maybe $2,000 credit card. They could probably buy, say, up to 6 positive cash flow properties, and then you really hit the ceiling, and then you're having to go to alternative lenders and pay, say, 8 to 9% for your last property for the lending on that. And what I mean by 6 properties is probably properties that are, say, worth $350,000. Their loan is at 80% LVR, so there's lending of, say, $280,000 on each of those properties. But the rent for those to be cash flow positive would be about $580 a week. So I don't think you could do that quickly. I think it would take a lot of time to be able to get that sort of rent. That's a yield of over 8% per property. So it's not a quick thing that you could accumulate 6 properties in a short space of time, in my opinion.
It's funny you mentioned 8% because in our first 2 episodes, we found the sweet spot to be about 7.9%. So if you're buying a property at $500K, you need 7.9% yield to have a property that sort of looks after itself. But the challenge is finding markets that you're going to get growth because you need that capital growth to expand your portfolio. Otherwise, you're saving to build up those deposits. But do you see it often? Like, have you dealt with a lot of clients where they've got 5 or 6 properties at those price points, or not really?
No, that's a lot to manage, because even just buying a $350,000 property and a loan of 80%, so $280,000, you'd need about $550,000 from your cash to fund those, because that's not taking into account any lending required for equity releases for the next property you're buying. So that's just 80% loan on each one of those 6 properties. And when you're buying properties at, say, that $350,000 price point, you're looking into areas where the tenant quality might not be fantastic, property managers may not be as good, your property management expenses and maintenance costs are going to be relatively high. I think it's better to just have a couple of really great properties and just worry about those rather than trying to buy really cheap properties and just trying to accumulate so many, because it does create a lot of administration work as well.
I have to agree, and Jez, we've spoken a lot about this. Instead of having like maybe 4 $250,000 properties, maybe it's better just to have 2, diversify over 2 properties instead of 4, because we don't want the headaches. And I guess you're utilizing your lending. Like if I know I can get lending of 800, I don't want to buy a 350 now and then another one in 6 months' time. Like I'd rather try and do it a lot earlier. But a point with these higher yield markets, Alana, do you find that there's restrictions with some lenders? So I know working in the past with some clients that the LVR, the banks wouldn't even, I don't know if they wouldn't lend, but the loan to value ratio or what they're willing to lend, they're like black mark these suburbs saying, well, we're not going to lend you that much. Do you find that, have you dealt with that a lot with your clients?
Yeah, I have actually. So a lot of lenders have areas or postcodes that they might say are more risky. So then they'll really trim down the rent. So they might, reduce it and only say take 80% of that rent. As an example, I've got a client who's recently bought in Rockhampton maybe 2 or 3 months ago at that $350,000 price point, and his current rent is only $410 per week. So it's going to take him a lot of time to get to that $580 a week rent that we need for it to be cash flow positive.
And was that client expecting that property to be cash flow positive or not really?
He does want that as his main goal, but luckily he's quite patient, so he knows it's going to take some time. He may need to put some extra funds into that property, I guess, to make it a bit more appealing, potentially renovate the bathroom, give it a quick tart up, or the kitchen, maybe make some more outdoor entertaining area because of the climate in Queensland. People want to use the outdoor space. So it's not something that you can build quickly. A cash flow positive property portfolio, you really do need patience.
And I think the point that you made is like the example that you made where you buy maybe 4 or 5 at those low price points. They're living at home, their rental expenses are really low, all their living expenses, they might be on a higher income. So that's easier, but you're really relying on your income from work, because the way that the lenders assess it is they only take a portion of the rental income, where with your normal PAYG salary, it's a lot more stable, and they take that whole chunk or that 100% as for serviceability, don't they? So it's really
exactly
like what
right.
you earn is what really helps you accumulate, not the cash flows of the properties so much.
Exactly. And even, some clients might say, I can really reduce my living expenses. Unfortunately, lenders already have an idea in mind of what, a person of that profile, their living expenses should be. So, there's no way to increase capacity generally that way. And when you start to accumulate more lower value properties, then your maintenance costs are going to be higher. Your running costs for those are going to be higher. So it does cost more in the long run than having a couple of really great properties.
All right.
Just one quick question, Alana. These people who own, say, 30 properties,
Yeah.
how then have they accumulated such a portfolio? Do they have an absurdly high income?
Great question. I don't think they do. Maybe they are buying some in trust. There are some lenders that do allow you to provide an accountant's letter or even self-declare that your properties are cash flow positive, and then you can exclude the lending from your serviceability, but only if the property's in a trust. There's probably only 1 or 2 lenders that would do that. Buying your first couple in the trust, you are using your PAYG or employment income to service that at the start. And then hopefully if you've made the right decision and, picked a quality asset, they will eventually be cash flow positive. But also with buying in a trust, there's a lot of expenses, as in tax returns, accountancy fees, legal advice. So you need, a lawyer generally to sign off on the loan documents and say they've provided you advice when you're buying properties in trust. There's also considerations around land tax. So generally the land tax thresholds are less when you've bought it in a corporation, which is a trust. And so as an example, in Queensland, if you've bought it in your own name, the land tax threshold at the moment is about 600K. But if you've bought it in a trust or a corporation, it's 350,000. And then you'll start to pay land tax if the land's worth more than those figures. So there's a lot of considerations if you are going to build up a huge portfolio and buy a lot of them in a trust.
But that won't get you to that 30, Alana. Like the clients that we've worked with like years ago when we worked together a lot on clients, we never saw, I think the most I ever saw was a client maybe with 10 properties coming, and that's more the back end. They're coming close to retirement. They had a lot of underperformers in there. But what I find, and a lot of people don't talk about, and I realize it now that we run a business, and I want to be transparent and very open about this. When I was working for someone, I wanted to buy in these markets, but I couldn't because the data was there, but I couldn't get the lending at the time because I was on PAYG and I had a ceiling. I couldn't keep accumulating. But then I get frustrated when I go on social media. I see something, I've got 30 properties by the age of 24. Follow me. I know everything. And it really aggravates me. I see it as you have a business that has a lot of profit, but you don't have to pay all of that as an income to yourself. That can just be a really profitable business, but I can get lending based on that business. And now I'm in a position where I can buy a lot more properties, but without the business, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So do you find a lot of business owners are in a better position because of their higher ceiling to earn a lot more for serviceability?
Yeah, I do find that even if they've got, net profit at the end of every year, even if they're not distributing out, we can use that in servicing. So often if someone does have a business that's going fantastically, they might be in a position to borrow more than someone who's employed PAYG.
Thank you for your input. Any more questions?
That was brilliant, Alana. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alana. And
No worries at all.
If anyone wants to talk to Alana, email us podcast@suburbdata.com.au and we can refer Alana over. But always great talking to you and thank you for the input.
Yeah, thanks again, Alana.
Great to talk to you guys. Thanks.
Bye. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
All right, that was a good one, Jez. What do you think?
I think that's really good. So the big question you had there, will I ever have an issue? The answer is yes.
Well, I just know from working with a lot of clients that there was always a ceiling. Like you might buy that 1 or 2 or 3 properties, but to think I can keep going with these high yield, I very much disagree with a lot of those statements. A lot of it comes from the income that you derive for serviceability.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. And then even what Alana was saying, that like you'd have to live at home, keep your expenses really low, and you could do it, but it still takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So when you hear these things online, what aren't they telling you?
Yeah.
Like be skeptical. Ask questions. Like how are they doing it? Don't just believe it as gospel.
Yeah, good one.
All right. How about granny flats? Granny flats, renting by room, NDIS, and short stay Airbnbs.
Yeah, so we've been talking about just looking for high yield markets, but what about just a property that has a granny flat? In fact, the first 2 properties I bought, they had granny flats. I was looking for sort of dual income opportunities to help cash flow the next one.
So the granny flats, so the first 2 properties you purchased had granny flats?
Yeah.
Did you factor that in when you were buying? Like you wanted the granny flat?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, and it was all about cash flow. So I was after either high yield areas or individual properties that had granny flats. That's when I was cash flow crazy. And then later years, I realised, you know what? It's capital growth that's the ants pants.
Have those properties, or have they done well?
Yeah, I offloaded one of them. I still have one. But they've done well. But, every property does well if you wait long enough.
And the granny flat, I did do some numbers a year, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, I was looking at doing a granny flat. And back then it was around the maybe 150 mark. And I didn't decide to go down that path because I would have, like both the properties would have just been in each other's pocket. You got the property sort of at the front middle and then that back granny flat, and they just would have been in each other's pockets. And even though it would have been better from a rental play, I just thought one day I'll knock down that property and maybe put duplex or townhouses instead. So I didn't want to put a granny flat on there and then knock that down. Yeah. I didn't really want to go down.
How much was that going to cost you just to build the granny flat?
I think it was around the 150 back then. But let's Adam, with the granny flats today, do you know roughly how much they cost?
Yeah, you're looking around the 180 plus mark these days for pretty much a standard 60 square meter granny flat. Plus, you're looking at extra fees for councils, which depending where you live, what LGA, you could look in excess of $10,000 as well.
So it can help from a cash flow perspective. So I think you made a good point. And thanks for that, Adam. I think you made a good point, Jeremy, about if you maybe need the cash flow, let's say you can't get the lending that you need for that next property, you might just go, you know what, 200,000, I can put a granny flat and receive an extra income stream.
Yeah. So if you've got 200,000 to spend, but you can't get, say, a $700,000 mortgage, maybe the granny flat is a good way to park your funds in something that's useful. But if you could get the lending, you'd be better off allocating that $200,000 as a deposit and stamp duty, legals to get into the market with another property somewhere.
How about renting by room and short stays?
Yeah, by room. I think the big deal here, renting by room, you got to have probably multiple bathrooms around the place. You're going to have a high turnover because people who don't know each other are going to be in each other's hip pocket and they're not going to get along.
And there could be vacancy issues there
yes,
too. Because
there could
if
be vacancies.
you got someone upstairs and downstairs and then one of the tenants leaves and you don't have a big market to potentially get that other tenant, and then property managers might want to not touch it because it's just a headache.
Yeah, the constant nuisance of people coming and going. And that's similar for Airbnb, the high vacancy. I think that's something a lot of people don't look into. They think, I'm going to get $1,000 a week from this Airbnb, but you're not going to rent it out every week and you've got to clean up after the last one. So, yeah, you need to factor in all of those issues.
Well, Airbnb, typically you'll have that higher potential rental income, but you're also going to have that expense depending if you outsource everything. And I had a client that had a unit in Canberra and did really well from a cash flow perspective. And let's say it's only rented out 60% of the year, for example, they were utilising that at other times because they were driving a lot. They weren't too far, actually, from Canberra. What's that suburb just outside of Canberra? Queanbeyan. I don't think, were they there or from Sydney? I can't remember. It was that long ago. But they had that Airbnb that they were utilising. Actually, they were in Sydney now that I remember. But really good rent, but you have to factor in all those expenses. And even from a lending perspective, it can hold you back unless you've got a couple years worth. So I don't know how much the lending environment's changed, but if you think right away, my first property, I want an Airbnb, think again if you're through your accumulation phase.
Yeah, and Airbnb is probably a pretty good option if you're in a touristy area, for example. If it's just a sort of middle suburb somewhere in a state capital, you probably won't get as much.
But you can do your analysis. You just jump on Airbnb and see what properties are going for maybe around Christmas time, or I'd say you'd be able to, it comes down to supply. If you've got a ton of Airbnbs, it's going to be.
Yeah, it's always the same, isn't it? And it's difficult to get some data on that, like the vacancy rates and how long it takes to get a customer.
Do you think you could do that one day?
Yeah, sure.
Can I ask a question, just quickly jumping in? Do you have to pay, does it add to your taxable income if you're earning a lot of money through, say, an Airbnb? Does that could increase you to a higher tax bracket?
Yeah, so it's you talk to a tax accountant, but it is classified as income. So normally you'd have all the income, the property manager or whoever looks after, the agency that looks after the property, similar to like a normal investment. You have all your rent, all your expenses, and then what's left over. And then typically it'll be maybe negatively geared or positively geared. So Adam, yeah, it does add to your taxable income. And the other thing is you'd have to portion out what would the capital gain be if it's only being rented out for a portion of the year. And then the other component is private use. That can cause headaches around valuations and capital gains. So that's why you really need to be close with your accountant there to have those discussions. But really good question. NDIS.
Yeah, I don't know anything about NDIS, so I haven't really looked much into it. You've had some a client with an experience with NDIS?
Well, I think it's a national disability insurance scheme, but it's been, again, a long time. But I remember I had some clients that did have a NDIS property, and I remember they had like a fixed guarantee in their rental return, but it was a new property, and that rental guarantee was going to drop off a cliff eventually, and there were vacancy issues around that area back then, but it was more the capital growth potential was there was a lot of supply in those specific markets. So I wouldn't just buy into an NDIS. I wouldn't personally, just because I noticed those risks back then. I really want to get into a market that's primed for capital growth. I don't want to wait 10, 15, 20 years or hear this story about, oh, long term it'll be perfect. Everything will be great long term. I want capital growth as soon as possible, and I'm happy to sacrifice yield to get there.
Yeah. Well, I think with this slide, what we're talking about here is
alternatives.
Alternatives. Because in part 2 and 1, we were talking about a yield of 7.9%. and we're looking at some of the suburbs around the country that have yields like that are typical, but you don't need to target those sort of markets, which are quite rare. You could actually have a more relaxed yield and find a property that's got something cash flow specific about it.
Isn't it interesting? Alana said 8%. We didn't even tell her that. She said 8%. I'm like 0.1%. Imagine if she said 7.9. Where else can you get positive cash flow? So put property aside. I know we've discussed a couple of these before, but I'd say like you could put money into a business and then you don't have to manage the business. You can just receive a dividend and the capital growth of that business, similar to like property. Shares we've already touched on. Crypto, you could do some staking. I won't dive into that. Car sharing, Chiro. So they used to have the Uber car shares, and now you can actually just rent your car out and receive an income. But I think that's a bit hands-on though.
Okay, so what's the idea you're trying to get across here with this slide?
I think there's alternates. Let's say property isn't your thing, and then you don't want to, let's say you buy that 500K property and then you're in that negative cash flow, or you don't want to risk buying in that 8% rental yield. What alternatives do you have that's not going to be a drain on your personal cash flow? Because the big negative of property is the negative cash flow early on through your accumulation phase, where you look at maybe some of these alternates, there's no drain to my lifestyle. I don't want any headaches. I just want to buy something that brings me money from day one.
From day one, right.
Go buy a vending machine.
Yeah, so I think if what you're saying here is if you are really keen on cash flow, if you need cash flow, like you're nearing retirement or in retirement, maybe property isn't the best investment.
And I always like to harp on this, but I'm big on asset allocation. Spread your assets out. It just gives you a bit of comfort. So like if you do want a bit of exposure to crypto, for example, mine's only very small, or shares, I like to have a big chunk within my property portfolio because of the stability. I like the rent. The rental income is very stable in the markets that I'm in. So I'm receiving rental growth. The rent's consistent. It's always getting paid in the markets I've gone into. So I love that aspect, but I'm not opposed to sort of spreading things out. So let's say you've already got, one investment or two and they are costing you. You might look at alternates where you can maybe generate cash flow from other investments right away just to sort of balance it out. So there's not that financial pressure on.
Yeah. I guess the point is if you're after cash flow, you don't have to buy high yielding property.
And with the property too, let's say you lose your job tomorrow, you want to make sure you've got that buffer or just cash there as an example, because that's another thing. You can just have money parked in a bank account earning interest, but I think
you don't have that on the list.
No, I should have put that on the list. So having a bank account, but
fixed deposit.
You could do that, but it's just more the fact that I think you just want to have your assets spread out a little bit more. The good thing about these asset classes, maybe not business so much, but like I'd say shares, crypto, Chiro, I don't know about a vending machine. I had a client that had that vending machine. That's why I put it up there.
Okay.
But
ATM machine.
It was very rare, the vending machine. But I'd say these other assets like shares and crypto, and like you can sell out of them very quickly. But with a property, I can't go sell a bedroom or a garage.
That's right.
So if I've got these other, like a bit of liquidity in my portfolio, just buys you a bit of time.
Yeah. Good one.
What else can be done with cash flow surplus? I think we don't need to talk about this too much, but I'd say from my experience, when you buy a property, a lot of people go, they're worried about the debt. I want to pay the debt off. I don't want any debt. But I like to balance it out to say, well, if you've got money in the offset, you've got time on your hands. So you want to just be able to control that debt. I wouldn't be in a phase where I want to pay down all my debt and be left with $0. I rather just bank up my offset account. So let's say I've got 500K in debt, let's say, and let's say I've got $500,000 in my offset. I don't want to pay that loan out. I want to have that liquidity ready to go, because if I pay that out, I'm left with $0. And then I lose my job. And then I've got nothing to live off. And then I've got to sell my property. So that's the way you need to be thinking. Think forward. Don't think just today. But I'd say that's most probably the normal one. And paying down, we're going to do a whole podcast on this, but paying down debt, you'd be surprised. A lot of people don't realize that debt pay down happens through super, typically. When you start getting to that super, because you have another income or asset injection at age 60. So if you've got a portfolio, your properties, your super, let's say it's worth $5 million, and let's say your debt's $1 million, you're still in a good spot, because if you want to pay that debt out, you can right away, or you just flip your loans to P&I and slowly pay off that debt. You don't have to do it aggressively. So it's like, where is my biggest ROI?
Yeah.
But
Cool.
again, we'll do more on that in the future. Risks and challenges. I think we've spoken a lot in these high yield areas. Vacancy rate, I think, could be an issue. Rental growth decline and minimal capital growth, limiting the amount of areas I can invest in.
Yeah, that's what I get out of it. It is, if there is a pure, obsessive pursuit of cash flow, you're actually worse off, and it's probably a slower road to retirement. That cash flow positive, retirement ready portfolio is actually sooner achieved by a pursuit of growth than it is a pursuit of yield. You can still find high yield properties with good capital growth, but if you start to push a bit too hard, then you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. If you try too hard for cash flow positive, you could be shooting yourself in the foot.
And I think doing the 3-part episode, I think the main thing that I've noticed is that the higher yield, or the big outcome or summary, is the higher yield that you go, the more areas you're limited to, which is, you think it's obvious, but I think really the main story from all of this is you're limiting markets that you're going to be researching potentially.
Yeah. There's the narrower those markets, the less opportunity you've got for the important thing, which is growth.
Is it for everyone? Is property cash flow for every investor?
I'd go so far as to say that it's actually a rare investor that should be pursuing cash flow positive property. I would say the bulk of investors should be just pursuing growth, but everyone's circumstance is different. The person who is nearing retirement or in retirement, what do they care about equity? They need something to cash flow their 9 to 5.
I think it's what phase you're in. Are you in the accumulation phase, or are you sort of at the back end where you want to take it easy, travel the world, work 2 days a week? Like, what's that balance?
Yeah.
What would you do today?
I would still go for growth. Even in retirement, I'd still go for growth simply because I use growth as a lumpy kind of cash flow. It's not week to week, it's not month to month. Every few years, though, I'll liquidate a property and there's a big injection of cash then. But then I would still pursue growth.
Yeah, I have seen, I guess, scenarios where you buy 2 or 3 or 4 properties and then you sell one down. But the one thing I would say with selling down is you've already got all the leverage from the bank. Why not keep utilizing? And you don't just sell down because you have to. I think you'd only really sell down if maybe there's not a lot of potential growth in that market, and then I'd recycle that and move it to another market.
Right.
But the thing is, you need to consider is, let's say you're earning 100,000 as an example, and then you've got a capital gain of 200 or 300, whatever it might be. You have to factor that into your numbers. So even though you can pay down a lot of your debt, you're paying there's going to be a big capital gain bill associated because your taxable income is going to go through the roof. So you might be paying tax at, a portion of your tax at 47% to the dollar. 47 cents to the dollar.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have you are about to purchase a property? What would you do?
Before we go to that, I would think that like the reason you would sell down is like, let's say, Jeremy, I want to work 1 day a week and it's all about lifestyle, and then my cash flow gets really low down to, let's say, 50,000. I see every month I'm going backwards. Then I might want to liquidate and then have that money to live off or invest in high yield type markets. Or like I said, when you're in, let's say, super and you're not working a lot, you might want to pay down, sell it down then when your tax liability might be a little bit lower, or move it into super. There's all these different ways about going about it, but just look at your own circumstance, do your research. What would I do? I'm going to buy a negatively geared property. That's what I'm going to be doing. So $750 is my price point for the next property I will be looking at. You'll notice the yield's a little bit lower than what we have been looking at. So around 3.7% is roughly the mark. I'm not too worried about the cash flow. So the next property is going to be costing me $266 roughly a week. So people might think, oh, that's crazy. But what I'm relying on is that capital growth. And look, the capital growth might not happen, but that's a risk I'm willing to take because I've already got investments. I'm happy to take that. That's my risk profile. I'm comfortable with that. Nothing's guaranteed, but I am shooting for that that capital growth over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think what these calculations show that is so clear, you are sacrificing a little bit of the yield there, because we showed in part one what it would take to get a cash flow positive property, a 7.9% yield. The average is around about 4%. You've come down a little bit on that, but your ROI is better than the bog standard long-term property investment example we showed in part one, where it was about 16%. You've got an ROI here of nearly 27%, and that's because you are happy to sacrifice cash flow for a better return on investment.
Well, it's closer to 29%. That's 28.
Well, that's an 8 there,
Yeah,
is
that's
it? Wow.
28.62.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
But I'm really relying on that capital growth. And if I don't get that, that's just something that I need to deal with. And nothing is, we'll never say that this is going to happen, but I'm willing to, like, investing, you have to take risks. And that's a risk I'm willing to take. And I'm in a position to take that risk. Different story if I'm, I can barely save, I'm maybe at my first property, I might go for a bit of a higher yield potentially just to balance that out. But because there's already a couple under the belt, I'm willing to, just go for more of that growth still.
Yeah.
That's what I'm after. And
good example.
We have spoken a lot about trading, and we are going to do a whole series on buying and selling, because as we know, there's going to be a high point, and then we're going to talk about maybe recycling and then moving to another market potentially.
Yeah.
But conclusion was balance. I think balance the cash flow, capital growth, and I think even asset allocation. Balance it out and do your own research. Just don't rely on what we say or what anyone else says. Do your own research, because I did.
Yeah, and I think that that first point there, that's what I get out of it. If you're too obsessed with cash flow, you miss out on capital growth, which is actually the fastest way to a retirement-ready portfolio.
Alrighty. So, Jez, where can listeners go for more resources?
Well, I hope you liked this three-part series. If you did, please let us know so we can continue producing this sort of stuff. If you want to hear more, so there's a subscribe link so you'll be notified. And if there's someone else you know who might benefit from hearing this, there's a share link to make that easier.
I think you can always send us an email with any suggestions that you have. So podcast@suburbdata.com.au. You can leave a comment, and it really helps if you can just share the podcast or even just leave a review. I think reviews, help the algorithm, I'm not sure. But I think leaving a review helps us help you and provide more content. So subscribe, like, share to the world, and thanks for tuning in, and see you in our next episode. Bye for now, and take care.